here is, I just said to Mark, just come and talk to us about raising our agency and our responsibility. And what is the right English? Not getting bunches. Here we are. So over to you, the worship team.
Good morning again, brothers and sisters in Christ. Let us rise and hold the assurance that we are going back home with.
No, it's not load shedding. We are moving from generator. That's why we ask Mark. That's why we ask today.
What are you doing?
Glory, hallelujah.
Jesus is mine. Oh, what a foretaste of glory divine, and of salvation, purchase of God, all of His giving, worship His Son. This is my story, this is my song, praising my Savior my story. This is my song. Praising my Savior all the day long. Perfect submission, perfect in love. Vision of pressure, focus on my son. Angels descending, bring from above. Echoes of mercy, whispers of love. This is my story, this is my song. Praising my Savior, all the day long. This is my story, this is my song. Praising my Savior, all the day long. Perfect submission, all is at rest. I need my Savior, unhappy and blessed. Watching and waiting, looking above, feeling His goodness, lost in His love. This is my story, this is my song. Praising my Savior, all the day long. This is my story, this is my song. Praising my Savior, all the day long.
Thank you very much. Please be seated. Somebody please take the mic up for. Thank you very much. We ask David has corrected me and say you're seeing a lot of things between me and who was doing I'll be the Mark Haywood. Mark, we were talking about Hamaskral and the water thing just before. I don't know whether you were already in the house. But David is going to introduce you as you come up. Usually we do Bible studies at this session, but we thought let's get this 4 minutes to come and talk to us.
Greetings again to the Synod. Mark is someone whose reputation, I think, precedes him, but some details about his life if you don't know too much. He's a social justice activist and former executive director and co-founder of Section 27, as well as a co-founder of the Treatment Action Campaign, or TAC. He sits on boards of several health and human rights NGOs in South Africa and internationally. In 2022, he was a recipient of the Lifetime Achievement Award of the Public Health Association of South Africa. He's currently an editor of Maverick Citizen, a section of the Daily Maverick that focuses on activism, human rights, and social justice in who knows how many academic institutions, speaking into things like law, human rights, HIV/AIDS, health, and he has written and edited several books, including a book on poetry called I Write What I Fight from 2015, and a memoir, Get Up, Stand Up, Personal Journeys Towards Social Justice in 2017. Mark, it's a privilege to have you here. We look forward to being challenged, disrupted, stirred. The floor is yours. Thank you.
Good morning, everybody. Good morning, Bishop. Good morning, all the leaders of the church. It's really an honor to be given this platform to engage with you, to talk to you, but to listen to you, and to get ideas from you and to work out how we can all work together to advance dignity and goodness in our country at a time of crisis. As the bishop said, when he asked me to come and speak to this important synod today, he asked me to talk about the agency of the church as part of civil society with what is happening in the country, and the call to the church as part of civil society to revise its agency, to revive its agency and mission at this time. And I was very happy to accept that invitation because, as was said in the brief introduction, like many of you, I have been an activist for equality, an activist for human rights, really for all of my adult conscious life. I think I trace my first political act to 1977 when I was 13 years old, when I was shocked at the murder of Steve Biko. And really ever since then, in whatever way I can, I've tried to build and better society based upon a belief in the potential of human beings and the goodness of human beings. I travel a lot. I meet a lot of people. These days I work as a journalist, as an editor. Almost every day I find myself in a different community. And in every community that I go to, I discover people who are working for other people, people who are working to try to advance goodness and human rights. And at the end of every one of those meetings, though, I come out with a question I don't have an answer to, and I'll put to you at the start of this presentation. If there's so many good people in our society, if good people so outnumber bad people, evil people, corrupt people, and I believe they do, perhaps you should ask yourself whether that is true. But if good people so outnumber bad people, why is evil winning at this moment in our country and in our world? And for me, it makes me think that we may have goodness, but we are doing something wrong in the way that we are organizing for goodness, for human rights, for dignity, and for decency of people. So I jump at an opportunity to speak to leaders like yourselves, to speak to good people, and I could feel it even as I walked into the room. And I've kept saying to myself over recent years, where's the church? Where's the church? Because I come from civil society, and I'll talk about that in a little bit, in a moment. But I keep on feeling there are missing parts in this jigsaw, that in order for us to be able to triumph, those parts have to all come together again and to work together again. So I'm going to speak for half an hour to this theme. I will not speak for longer than half an hour because I really want to hear you and I really want to engage and to have discussion. And I'm going to structure my comments really around three themes, and it's linked to a talk that I gave yesterday. Yesterday I was asked to go and speak at the Center for Faith and Community at the University of Pretoria, which the bishop knows well, Stefan de Beer. Again, a wonderful institution. It was just wonderful to see all these graduates coming from different parts of Gauteng to get their certificates for doing courses in trauma and counseling and community and activism, and to look in that room and think, gosh, here are the forces that can fix our country. But the theme yesterday that I was asked to speak to was growing down, resist, rebuild, rise. And I'm going to structure my comments around resist, rebuild, rise. And I'm going to finish with some modest, deferential suggestions about how you can help that movement. But I want to start by making the obvious point, something that should be on all of our minds, which is that we live at a time of enormous difficulty for people, for the vast majority of people in this country. We live at a time when people are experiencing great pain, trauma, indignity, despair. High unemployment, particularly amongst young people, nearly 70%. Imagine having nothing to do in your life or thinking you have nothing to do. High levels of hunger. 12 million people experience hunger every day in our country. High levels of violence. We're a country at war, if truth be told. 25,000 murders a year now. 25,000 murders a year. And we could go on. I could continue this catalogue of a society that has lost its way, has lost a sense of solidarity, has lost a sense of compassion. But I don't want to speak about despair, because it's obvious and we encounter it all of the time. I want to speak rather about hope and the connection between hope and power. Because for me, the critical question for all of us is, how do we build the power of good once again in our country and in our world? But I don't want to speak about hope as if it's just a panacea, that it's okay, everybody, worry, there's reason for hope. I want to talk about hope because hope connects us to agency and to people's agency, and in this room, to prophetic social action. So let me start with this idea of resistance. The bishop asked me to talk about civil society, which is where I've spent many of my years. Before I do that, I want to just clear one sometimes misconception. Civil society is not a force that is anti-government, anti-this, anti-that. Civil society, in my view, is a force that is made up of tens of thousands of organizations, non-governmental organizations, community-based organizations, faith-based organizations, legal organizations, etc., which is pro-government, but pro-government that is pro-poor, pro-dignity, pro-decency. Civil society wants a government that uses the resources of this country to uplift our communities. It wants a government that is strong to regulate the economy, to regulate society, to make sure that its protective powers are used to protect the most vulnerable in our society. So when I'm saying this because I don't want you to think that when I talk about resistance, that I'm talking about resistance against the government. I'm talking about resistance against poverty and despair and destruction and dehumanization of the majority of people in our country. And what I want to say is that resistance, we may feel sometimes that there's no resistance, that people are completely vulnerable and completely exposed, but actually that resistance is very, very widespread. In the middle of this week, I think it was Wednesday, in my capacity as a journalist, at the end of the day, I reflected back on the day, and I realized that just in one day, I had visited 3-4 different sites of resistance. In the morning, I had attended a press conference organized by this organization, Abatla Libasem Jondolo, and others, an organization of shack dwellers, where they had spoken out against xenophobia and had expressed community and solidarity and had called upon communities not to turn on other Black people, particularly from other African countries. And they had talked about launching litigation against this organization called Operation Dudula, which is spreading hatred and is hurting people and stopping people accessing clinics and schools. That was the morning. Later in the afternoon, I tuned in to a court hearing where an NGO, which is the one I used to work for, called Section 27, was representing the families of the 144 mental health care users who had died at Life Esidimeni, or when they were moved from Life Esidimeni in 2016, representing them in court. And I realized that those families were really the most vulnerable. People with mental health issues are least able to speak up for themselves because of stigma, just like with HIV. And I thought, there is a civil society organization working for the most vulnerable and the most poor. And then on the same day, I'd met with a communications organization, a private organization, to discuss the idea we have of creating something called Project Hope. We want to map hope all around the country and create a map that shows communities all over the country where there are good people working to advance the community interests, so that people can literally see a map and click on this town and this village and this city and this suburb and so on, and see this person, that's where we can go to work, that's where we can go to assist. And that was just one day. You know, I could spend the morning, if you like, itemizing the different organizations and the work that they are doing and what motivates that work. I could tell you the names of hundreds of people who work on food security, sometimes alone, sometimes in organizations. But what that tells me is that the resistance is widespread, that I have shown you the tip of the iceberg, and that there are thousands of people across the country on many, many different fronts of pain and suffering who are part of this thing we call civil society, who are trying to work for other people. And it makes me think about my role in the media. I'm an editor of part of the Daily Maverick, because I think the media is often part of the problem, and I'm trying from inside at the moment to create a bit of a revolution in the media, because the media shapes what we see and how we see. More importantly, it shapes what we don't see very often. And so if you look at the media, and I remember Archbishop Tutu used to say this, and the Dalai Lama and so on, you would think that our country is just made up of corrupt politicians and corrupt business people and thieves and fools and so on, because the media is obsessed with those stories. And those stories are very demoralizing. They're not just demoralizing, they're debilitating. They make you despair. Sometimes they take the energy out of you. And those stories are true, yes, but they are not the only story of our country, and they're not the only story that should be told. And I'm not making an argument that we should hide what is evil and corrupt and so on, and that we shouldn't pay any attention to that. But what I'm saying is that the lives of invisible people, the stories of people who are the opposite of people who are corrupt, must be told as well. The stories of the things that are working must be told as well, because if we tell the stories of what is working, then people will get ideas. I can do this in my community. I can tell you, for example, because again, of my own work, that although the basic education system is broken, there are schools that are getting very, very high results because of the efforts of a principal or because of the efforts of a group of teachers, even in a very difficult, broken environment. We need people to see those schools. I can tell you of hospitals that are working in our country because of the work of the nurses or the doctors. We need to tell those stories as well, because people will say, well, now I know what I can do. And I raise this because people engaged in resistance to evil don't see each other, and they feel as if they are in a minority. They feel isolated. You know, I sometimes find in Johannesburg, where I stay, people in one suburb don't know what somebody is doing in the next suburb around food insecurity. There's so many good people working around food kitchens in Johannesburg, but you can go to Bez Valley, Bertram's, and there's a wonderful thing there called the Makers Valley Partnership. There used to be a lovely lady called Mamra Filwe who created a beautiful vegetable garden that fed people in the area until the city of Johannesburg bulldozed it down and destroyed it last year. But the people in Bez Valley don't know, the people in North don't know what the people in Bez Valley are doing. And they're 1 kilometer away, literally. So these are some of the things that we have to change. So I want to finish this section on resistance by quoting just briefly something that was written by a chap called Paul Evans. He wrote a beautiful book called Blessed Unrest. He's an environmentalist, and his book documents how people have started to join together around environmental issues in the world over the last 20 years. And he says, what he points to is, quote, a worldwide gathering of ordinary and extraordinary people are reconstituting the notion of what it means to be a human being. This is the first time in history that a large social movement is not bound together by an ism. What unifies it is ideas, not ideologies. There is a vast difference between the two. Ideas question and liberate, while ideologies justify and dictate. And I think that he's right. People reconstitution the notion of what it means to be a human being. We have to critique, yes, but we also have to be able to talk about better ways of doing things, better ways of running society. And one of the reasons I would say to you that we have to do this is because the world and South Africa has changed dramatically in the last 20 years. The ideas that we once had, someone like me, the older people amongst us, I'm 58, grew up with this idea that the state would provide education, would provide clean water, would provide healthcare services, would do It's gone. It doesn't mean that part of our vision should not be to reconstitute the state, to do that. The state is vital. But if you think now that the state is going to do those things just because you demand them, you're wrong. That's what Hammanskraal tells us, and the cholera outbreak in Hammanskraal. The state is failing because the state is corrupted. The state is failing because the elites and the rich in our society have turned their backs on the poor and no longer pay taxes to make it possible for the state to provide the services that it is meant traditionally to provide to protect the weakest amongst us. But we are going to have to win the battle of ideas and of humanity to be able to get the state back to where it was. The idea of the state 50 years ago, of course, not the apartheid state, because the apartheid state was not interested in poor people and black people, but the notion of the state that existed in the world. And in fact, the notion of the state with which we took over the state in 1994, believing that the state, and this is what the Constitution told us, believing that the state would be the vehicle to uplift people. It must still be that vehicle, but we can't make assumptions that just because we demand it's going to do that. So we have to look at rebuilding from below. And here, the message that I wanted to put on the table today was to say, what strikes me as I move around in different spaces is that there are no shortages of ideas. The problem that faces the world is not that we don't have solutions. The problem is that we don't have the power to make sure that the solutions that we have are implemented to solve the problems that we have. At every level, macro, micro, urban, rural, village, even driving here, and I was shocked, I know about it in my mind, but driving from Johannesburg this morning through all of that pollution, the clouds like a fog, and knowing that this fog is killing people. I mean, this is the worst polluted area in the world, believe it or not. And you know better than me. And it doesn't have to be that way. We have technologies today around generating energy that can give us clean energy. We can't implement them overnight, but we have to be prepared to start to implement it. Otherwise, we condemn the people of Mpumalanga to this for another 50 years, at least. And that's wrong. It's evil. It's immoral to do that. But there's nowhere where there's a problem and not a solution. If you take issues of economy, you have economists now who talk about what we need is well-being economies. Economies that are centered on human well-being rather than gross domestic product, which is what most economies are centered on. Now, what is wrong with an idea that says economies should be structured around the well-being of society? What's wrong with that? Rather than economies structured around the well-being of 10% of society. And if there are ideas about how you could do it, why not do it? It requires a mind shift. And I think part of the challenge of all of us in this room, all of us in society, is to educate ourselves on these issues so that when I say something like this to you, I'm not just giving you rhetoric. I can back up what I say. I've struggled to understand the science, the issues, and so on and so on. That was, by the way, how we built the Treatment Action Campaign. I was one of the founders of the Treatment Action Campaign. When we started the TAC, everybody who got AIDS died of AIDS. Today, we have 5.5 million people living with HIV, receiving antiretroviral treatment every single day through us. through organizing our power, but we built the team by going into communities and teaching people about their bodies, about the virus, about how the virus weakens the body, about what are the medicines, what's the names of the medicines, how do the medicines work. We didn't talk down to those people and say, you don't need to understand this, leave it to the experts. We made the people the experts on these issues. And to this day, people talk about the Treatment Action Campaign as a university for poor people, for poor women, for Black women living with HIV. And I think we need to create universities of knowledge through the church, through civil society, because people aren't just hungry for food. They're hungry for knowledge. They're hungry for dignity. They're hungry for learning. And if you give people learning and knowledge, they work with that learning and knowledge. That's always been my experience. But there are ideas. There are ideas around food security. There are ideas around basic education. 2 weeks ago, I went to participate in a meeting of something called the Columba Leadership Academy, which is working in several hundred schools throughout our country. I walked away from there amazed. In that room was the solution to how to fix our basic education system. Teachers and learners working together. Learners who had been some of the worst gangsters in the school, who were now leading the schools, who stopped taking nyope, stopped. And I thought, there's the solution to the education crisis. I don't have time, but Bishop, if you want to hear about it and you all like to hear about it, I can put you in touch with people like that. But there's solutions. And again, the thing that in my activism over the years has always struck me is that it's poor people who built this country. And poor people know how to fix everything. There's an incredible intelligence in the poor. That's where the intelligence resides. But the way we structure our society doesn't allow that intelligence to be given expression. So we have millions of unemployed people who are clever people, who are capable people, but they're left sitting begging on the roadside. And that is just so wrong. So there are solutions. People are rebuilding. We must continue rebuilding. Rebuilding helps to build social cohesion. It helps to connect us with each other. It helps us to reestablish values that are important. In the early days of the COVID pandemic, people set up these things called community action networks in Johannesburg and Cape Town mainly. They were wonderful because suddenly, for the first time, white people were starting to work with Black people again in communities to ensure access to food, to ensure that some of their material privileges were made available to people who didn't have privilege. And the funny thing is that you could see that these people who usually are behind walls and security fences, they were loving it because they were discovering community again with other people. They were breaking down these barriers that have been built up. Ironically, in the time of freedom, we've built stronger barriers across races. I mean, I find it odd that I spent more time often in townships and Black communities before 1994, when I was an underground activist in the struggle, than I do now, because the way we get shunted around, the suburbs we live in, the schools we send our kids to, it's all working against our fundamental aspirations as people and as a country. So to take just 5, at the maximum 10 more minutes to moving to the question of rising. But this brings me back to where I started, which is, if all of this is happening, if what I'm telling you is true, and I believe it is, why are we losing? Why does it sometimes feel like, despite making so much effort, we seem to get so little result at a kind of macro level in changing the balance between good and evil in the country. Why does it sometimes feel like the enemy is winning without even having to engage us? In some countries like Zimbabwe or China or Russia, if you're somebody like me or most of us in here, we wouldn't be able to talk like this. We'd be in prison. Here we still have freedom and freedom of speech and freedom of expression, and we need to use that freedom of speech and expression. So it's not as if there's a state that wants to put me in prison that the problem is the problem here. The problem has to be partly within us here. I think we allow things like these cell phones and constant preoccupation with social media and WhatsApp and so on to disrupt our thinking. But that's another discussion, and we stop talking to each other and working with each other. But I sometimes think that we're forgetting about, I talk a lot about human rights. People like me talk about human rights, but we're often forgetting the human in human rights. We're forgetting what it is that moves human beings to action and to solidarity. And in my notes, and I'm not going to go through it because time is running out, I wanted to quote from some books I've been reading recently, one by one of the founders of Black Lives Matter in the United States. People who are beginning to say, look, we've been doing things wrong. We've got to change the way we're doing things. Kumi Naidoo, who some of you may know, South African activist, he's written a lovely book called Letters to My Mother, a very painful book in some ways because it's also about the death of his mother and then the suicide of his son last year. But Kumi says we must appeal to people's hearts as well as to their heads, bringing together arts, culture, and activism in a new type of artivism that engages people's deepest impulses towards love, justice, and freedom. And I think that that's how successful movements are built. Successful movements are built on joy, on love, on solidarity, on camaraderie, on learning, on expression. They're not built on ideology. The bishop joked with me as I came up here, asked me if I'm still a communist. There was a time in my life when I read all of Lenin and Marx and Trotsky and all of those. I'm still a socialist in heart, in that I believe in social society structured around solidarity. But I'm no longer somebody who thinks that we can move on the basis of ideologies. I'm somebody who believes that we can move on the basis of human beings amongst us, and who really does believe, and I think all the evidence is there. And you should read a book called The Book of Joy by Desmond Tutu and the Dalai Lama. There's even scientific evidence that shows that our neurological wiring is towards compassion. Our lights light up when we show compassion and when we give compassion. There's even medical evidence that shows why we smile so much as human beings. That's why I say there's a force, but it has to be organized again, because it is being, we talk about being the disruptors, but we at the moment, we are the people who are being disrupted. So let me conclude by saying, what will it take to rise? And I'm on rise now, so I'm nearly done. When I was a youngster, I lived in England for the early years of my life, went to school there. And in those days, the television was still fairly new, and you'd have the news every evening at 6:00, and before the news, you'd have the weather, and the weatherman would come on. And I even remember his name, but it's not relevant here. And he'd say, it's going to be sunny tomorrow, and it would rain. Or he'd say, it's going to be rainy tomorrow, sun. And it was a standing joke. The weatherman always gets it wrong. Because in those days, they didn't have satellites. So, of course, there was some science to meteorology, but they didn't have the precision. You couldn't see a bank of high pressure or low pressure coming. Today, the weatherman never gets it wrong because of technological advancement. And I'm raising this because one thing we must understand as we sit here today is that we can see where our society is going if we don't intervene as human beings. Because we have data, digital technology, because we have things like satellites, because we're able to crunch information, gather and crunch information at an unprecedented rate, I can tell you what the world is going to look like in a few years' time or next year. I can tell you what the climate crisis is going to do to our country and to our world based on science, not not wishful, but distressed feeling. And I often ask myself, well, why is it then we don't exercise more social intelligence as people of the church, as activists, as human beings? Social intelligence, not artificial intelligence. Take advantage of the tools that we have to understand where we are going as a society. We live waiting for the next crisis in the present, like Hammondskraal, like cholera. I can tell you, I could have told you, in fact, I can probably show you something I wrote a few years ago saying cholera is coming. I can tell you now we have a mental health crisis in this country, serious mental health crisis. Probably the news will wake up to it in a few years' time when there's like some terrible massacre, and then somebody's going to say, you see, we've got trauma and mental illness on a it's here now. I can tell you that the food that most of us are eating is poisoning us and killing us, and is going to cause an explosion of diseases, communicable, non-communicable diseases, cancers, diabetes, obesity, etc. The evidence is already there. We have social intelligence, so why do we wait for the crisis in the present rather than help people to understand the connection between the present and the future, and help people to step up to change the path to the future? Because if we remain prostrate, as we are prostrate, doing nothing, then, and I don't want to finish on a negative, despairing note, but things are going to get worse if we don't work together to act. And so this is I'll begin where I started. This is my appeal to us, to you, to us. Back in 1985, the church had its Kairos moment. When it came together and issued a statement, as you all know, about apartheid and the evils of apartheid. And following the Kairos moment, the church, through the South African Council of Churches and others, rose to prominence and provided a kind of moral umbrella that affirmed the movement against apartheid and the last years of the resistance to racial discrimination. I know it. I was a kid. Many of us were kids, looking up to Archbishop Tutu and others. You know, I look back now and I realize what it did to me, how it gave me confidence, it gave me hope, how it gave millions of people hope. And I feel as if the church needs to step into that space again. Because you have moral authority. Those of you who haven't been captured, which is all of you in this room, I hope. You have moral authority. You have a constituency that believes in you. Every week, people come to your churches to listen to you. You go out and you minister to people in the communities. You have a constituency. I don't have a constituency. I'm just Mark, the rabble-rouser, the civil society person. But there is so much, and this is, for me, part of the jigsaw that has to be now put together. You know, yesterday, I've only obviously been here for a few minutes. Yesterday, when I listened to Reverend Mzwandile Molo from the SACC, spoke before me at this thing in University of Pretoria. I was so inspired in 10 minutes. And I said, I wish that could be broadcast to the whole country, not to the 200 people in the church here. Because these are the things that people need to hear. So we have got to get down. You are in the communities. The question is, what are we doing in the communities? This civil society that I talked to you about needs your help. The movements that I could talk to you about, the Abaslali, Basa and John Dolos and others, need your help. There are people working in your communities, local communities, on food, on mental illness, on the aged, on so on, who need your affirmation, if you can find them. At a provincial level, at a national level. This thing called civil society, which I am part of, needs succor from you. You know, often we feel lonely and quite despairing. You're banging your head against the wall, and some mornings you think, I just can't any longer keep this up. It just doesn't feel like we're making headway. And there's a lot of people who feel like that. I can tell you many people speak to me, quite despondent activists. We've tried. Not sure if we can continue doing this much longer. You can help. I'm not saying your role is a prop. I'm saying your role is a role of equal leadership with other people in the rest of society, to bring your emotional resources, to bring your leadership resources, to bring your solidarity, to bring your Christianity, to bring all of this to the cause of dignity, equality, decency, and good. And that's what, and I'll finish here, that's what our Constitution is about. I'm a very big believer in the South African Constitution because it committed our country to being a country where everybody is equal, a country based on social justice and democracy and human rights. So we have everything on our side. The law is on our side. The supreme law of the country is on our side. We have everything on our side, but we're in danger of losing. And that's my challenge, if you like, to you. How do we tip the balance so that we regain hope and conviction that good can overcome? Thank you very much.
As the day is coming, and somebody if you would give Mark a chair so that as the day is coming.
Okay, thanks.
This is exactly the center, the graduation that Mark talks about is of that center that Janine James who was here yesterday, and I are board members. So Stefan de Beer and I proved the conspiracy of bringing Mark and Zoe together, and it is good to hear that we paid some dividends.
Thanks, Bishop, and thanks, Mark. It's been very thought-provoking. Friends, we've got 15 minutes for questions. You, Bishop, can I encourage, maybe we have 5 questions. People keep it brief, and then there's 10 minutes at least for Mark then to respond. So can we have some hands, questions?
There's been protest, progressive protest.
Oh.
And it came from the Assistant Secretary of the Synod, Clancy. We're reflecting at the breakfast. He said, how is it? He says, no, it's on cruising. The only thing that I'm critical of is only male ministers who are Russian mics. And she was saying, I challenged the youth and said, where's the 20%? Where are the women? Where is the laity? That is what she said. So I thought, let me just go that way.
We've got 3 men. Can we have 2 ladies? We'll give to Mr. Mavuso to start. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. I'm standing up to confess my sins. When when Mike Haywood was on the program, the devil said to me, he's going to Limpopo. But the opposite was true. I love the way you coached your presentation, that we, the church, as the people who have got the constituency, have got the power to change things around. And I'm sitting here thinking what our mission programs can do to begin to regain the power that you spoke about. The power that can change things, and more than the gospel preaching that is out of context, but be contextualized with the community development, with citizenship. Maybe let me stress, active citizenship. The program I was presenting about yesterday, you were not here, Mike. Some of the people in the queue where we were graduating, the speaking of graduation, they come from the program that we as a church in Mandela identified, and we send them to that program to be prepared intellectually to take charge of their own development and do not think otherwise. But if our society and second mission programs can begin to do exactly this is what is meant by mission work. Nothing else that is out of the ordinary or that try to impress and that we are taking the mark for doing something so that we can give report. But make those impressions, those programs that will be from ground up to begin to change the lives of the people. So thank you very much for bringing that message of true mission work in whatever that we are doing. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, for a wonderful presentation. I was really challenged by the points that you were making. Number one, you opened your presentation with a statement, a question, asking that if there are so many good people, why we have many dead things. Number one, this is my personal view. Good people are weak. Good people are religious and they are weak. They don't invent anything. They are not leading any industries. They are not influential. They don't participate in the influence of the world. The world is governed by the rich, and the government is just in the center, middlemen. Those who govern the world are the rich. Why they are winning? Because they make the rules. Yesterday or day before yesterday, we were here praying and listening to different presentations, but interest rates were going high while we were here praying. So how do we resist? We can't resist because we are not having anything. The Reserve Bank is an extension of Federal Bank in America, which was created by 7 men in 1910. What governs us economically is an extension of the elite, those who govern the world. Even the government, that institution does not belong to them. They are not running it. But some powerful people are running it. We come here and pray, but at night, powerful people are making decisions on our behalf. And we have to comply. If yesterday the bread was 17 rand, and interest rates goes up and the bread is 20 rand, the poor have no choice, but they will go deeper in poverty. Because even us, we have nothing to do. We speak about challenging the system, we do not even understand the system. You can ask us here, what are the entities and institutions that govern the system that we always talk about? We profit against the system that we are failing even to understand. I identify myself as a young activist, but I realize something, that I don't understand the system. The system that today, tomorrow I speak about, but I could not identify what is the system, where does it come from, who created it, and what is the purpose. I could not understand. But what I could understand is that God has saved us, but we cannot save ourselves from the system. So we have many challenges, say, that we are failing to resolve. And these challenges are institutional. And we are not able to shake the institutions. Other people think that these institutions are natural. Historically, we don't understand how these institutions were formed.
Okay, bro. That's my coordinator. I'm at 20%. Hallelujah. To the four that are at the mic or the last four to speak, please jump to the question. Please jump to the question. Don't preamble too long because we are running out of time.
Thank you for your powerful comment.
You can go as well, then. Thank you.
I just have one question, and that is what. Okay.
Go ahead.
What you already mentioned some books. You said the Book of Joy, Letters to My Mother, the Letters to My Mother. What books, resources, scholars, what can we keep engaging with to learn and to continue to grow and how we can engage for good in our communities? I want to hear from you what resources you recommend.
In 1994, at the dawn of democracy, a friend of mine or a colleague of mine who has passed on may so rest in peace, Professor Ukumele Mneko. We came together at the dawn of democracy and we had a conversation, and one of the questions we asked ourselves is, what are we going to preach now that democracy has come upon us? Because by that time, our training was a little tilted towards social injustice and the theology of the oppressed. That training that we got at the seminar. And we felt, no, we have reached democracy, so we no longer need those type of theology. And we sat back, and later as time went on, that idea then kind of invaded into or dissipated into some distance, and later we developed into that kind of ministry is what is in it for us to do something in the community. What is it? What is in it for us? So we came to that situation where we said, no, we have to do something to get something. But what you have said today, you have recalled us and said, this is the time. That kind of moment has come again for us to stand up and preach and talk to the people and yes, to do all those things that we used to do in the past and preaching the gospel more forcefully than we did in the past. And thank you so much for that.
Thank you very much for the presentation. You touched on one of my struggles. 20 years ago, when I was writing my mini, whatever you call it, I struggled with the question, what it means to be a black person in a post-apartheid South Africa. And my struggle is a systematic struggle. It's a struggle that is informed by the Bible, but contradicted by my own realities of life. When the Bible tells me that I'm equally made and created in the image of God, and when I look around, the system that I lived in made me to doubt. But I'm sitting here and saying things have reversed. The very same church that has preferential option for the poor. It is the church that has divorced itself from the poor and taken so much from the poor. And your presentation for me, it is a challenge for a church to begin to redefine its ministry and mission for the poor. I'm speaking as a man who ministers in a city that all of us know, a city that is so depressed by the poor people. And you see brokenness around the city. The church that only become a church on a Sunday during the week is there. If you can help us to wrestle with the question in your presentation as we made it, how can we rise or help us to rise as a church, not to be the church of the country, but the church in the country?
Thank you, sir, for the wonderful presentation. I come from the 1976 youth movement. We jumped fences. We faced tear gas in Soweto as young people. The revolution was achieved by young people. I'm looking at the composition of this synod, and I'm thinking the first group that this message should reach, I'm happy that you are sincere. To involve, I agree with what you said. To achieve revolution, we need to involve young people. We are the ones who will become sensitive. There is no Bible. I will carry it. And part of my program now is, of course, I've got a house of my own. But where are you going to be? What are you? Most of us here have got. We must look after our people. We cannot risk. We cannot. But I'm trying to say, let's involve young people of this country. The schools, churches, they are the ones who are going to achieve something. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And thanks for the most wonderful presentation, Mark, and the work that you do in terms of social justice. I think you put a challenge to all of us, and the challenge is around moral regeneration. The attitude of anything goes is affecting us so much that we are now always up the distance between right and wrong. And that distance is growing so big that greed is taking it over, and we always then misinterpret greed. And sometimes we say some of these things are caused by poverty, yet it is greed that overrides the poverty, and that causes the amount of poverty that we have within our community. You mentioned that, when you talk about the time of moral generation, when you had people like Bishop who led us so well during those initiatives. But I'm afraid that in today's life, even within the church, we are at a point where we lack the bishop duties of the time. That we need amongst ourselves to build that moral generation and that building within us, closing the gap between right and wrong. Once we are able to move away from the attitude of anything goes, then we will then be at a point where we are able to minimize some of the things that happen, whether it is within the school, whether it is within our communities, or within our churches, we see that the social issues around social investment are growing so much that as we see on a daily basis, we wonder, what is it that we could do during our times to close the gap between right and wrong, and to move away and start focusing on a better attitude other than focusing on an attitude of anything else. And I challenge everyone that we need to start looking internally and start focusing internally to say, what is it that will bring the moral generation back into our society and back into the church? Thank you.
Thank you, Mark. We'll give over to Mark to answer those questions.
Thank you very much for very powerful, honest questions and inspiring questions. I'm very glad to hear that we are at one in how we understand our society and the challenges of our society. You are witness, much more than me, because you work in your communities, in your churches. You know what's going on in our society, and you're part of the solution. And I am happy as Mark to do anything I can, not just to come here today and disappear, to assist you with the process that you've talked about, to try to find other people who can assist. I'll happily give a list of some of the books. I can send it to the bishop and he can distribute it. I'll come back to that in a minute, but I would love to offer my help. I'll respond to a couple of questions. Only Mr. Mavuso gave his name, sadly. I'd like to be able to name the people who spoke, but I've got Mr. Mavuso and 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, and 7. But I want to address most of my comments and then link the comments to the young man who's the second speaker, who raised very, very important points. And I want to agree with you, but I also want to disagree with you. Because what I'd like to say is that actually we have power.
Yes.
We have a lot of power, but we have surrendered our power. And we haven't helped people to find their own power. If there are millions of people in South Africa who have rediscovered their power and can work for good in communities, we will see this greed and this evil and this corruption and this elite that you've talked about, which is systematically embedded, you're right, in our society. It will be on the run. It will. I'll give you a couple of examples, and then I'm going to be specific about some of the things that we should be doing, because we can't operate outside of politics. You know, when we started the treatment action campaign in 1998, as I said in my speech, everybody who got HIV died of AIDS. There was stigma, you remember? Gugu Dlamini stoned to death in KwaMashu by the community because she declared her HIV status. Nobody wanted to talk about it. Nobody wanted to say, yes, I have HIV. Medicines were too expensive. The president, Mbeki, subscribed to what we call AIDS denialism, saying there's no such thing as HIV. The odds were stacked against us, completely stacked against us. We started with 5 people. We built a movement that at its peak was 50,000 people. We didn't just take on the on the government. We took on the drug companies, the pharmaceutical companies. I'm sorry, the young man, just stand up so I know where. Loazi. I see you. The youth, Reverend Loazi, the youth leader. It wasn't just against the government, it was against the drug companies, and the drug companies are part of that they're the most powerful, richest companies in the world, part of the very elite that perverts democracies that you are talking about. But the movement in South Africa catalyzed a movement around the world, and they told us when we started that campaign, no, antiretroviral drugs cost 5,000 Rand a month. No poor person could afford that. They told us, no, they can't be made any cheaper. That's what it costs to make these medicines. Today, those medicines cost 200 Rand a month. 5,000 to 200, because the people said, no, we don't accept this. And the people challenged them. And when they stand up peacefully and with justice and morality and God on their sides, then millions more people silently begin to support them. And that's how we won our struggle as the Treatment Action Campaign. I can tell you about the individuals because I journeyed in that struggle. I remember a young woman, I went to take a statement from her for a court case. She was sitting in the corner of the room. She was eating those salts because of the fear of HIV and the stigma. She was sobbing and crying, and she was just this pathetic, shriveled, broken human being. 3 years later, the same Sarah, one day I looked at her, she was standing outside the Pretoria High Court with her baby in her arms, saying, I'm one of the people living with HIV who's trying to protect my child from being born with HIV. There was a transformation in that person. And we can build transformation in all people, including those people who are the most broken, if we're prepared to take the time to engage and work with people properly. And I could give you, Lwazi, other examples. Now, I'm not saying that what you're saying is wrong. What you're saying is right. And there will be resistance to an attempt to mobilize people for good. There will be resistance. But we can overcome that resistance. We have to believe that we can build good societies. You take our country. Next year, we have an election. In the last election, in the local government election, 6 million people voted and 12 million people who could have voted didn't vote. They chose not to exercise their power because they believe the system is against them. But what if 18 million people had voted instead of 6 million people? And what if we could vote for? Not a political party, necessarily, but a power to hold power to account. So I would say that one of the jobs of the church, for example, as we have the opportunity in a year's time to change the power in this country, is how do we go and start talking to young people? And the colleague who talked about the importance of young people is absolutely right. How particularly do we persuade young people to get IDs, to register, and to vote for something? Not vote for a promise of a political party, but to vote for a vision of decent quality education, jobs, to vote with knowledge of how governmental systems work, to vote with a knowledge of how much money there is in this country. And if that money was properly used and allocated, it would transform people's lives. We are not a poor country. The problem is that the riches of this country are going to people who are a tiny elite of this country. And if we could get those riches down into communities, people would begin to have hope again. The problem, Reverend Loazi, is that we consent to be governed like this, because we've given up a lot of the time, because people who have moral influence like yourselves have stayed quiet for too long. And it won't be easy. It will not be easy. But the alternative is what? The alternative is despair. The alternative is just to allow this to happen to us. So one of the speakers mentioned active citizenship. We need active citizenship. We need to teach people about their rights, not rights so that they can get rich and be greedy and look after their own interests. Rights so that they can be part of a community. And I'm happy, I'll come back, Bishop, to this very same synod, to this very same space, and I'll spend a day, if you like, sometime, talking about rights, not in an abstract fashion, but about how the law gives us power at community level. If only people knew the law about local government, how local government is meant to work, how budgets are meant to be drawn up, what is meant to determine what budgets get spent on. Give people power through knowledge and understanding and link it to a vision. And I promise you, you will begin to see change. But it's a struggle. But when Nelson Mandela in the early 1950s or the late 1940s as a young person decided that he had a mission, when Bishop Tutu decided that he had a mission, they didn't think they'd win in 1 year. They started out on a path and that path was guided by notions of dignity and decency and equality and community and solidarity. And we have to, because all I'm saying is that we have to start on that path and we have to be very practical. So I've talked in general terms today. I would challenge you to say, well, what does this mean in my ministry? What does this mean in my church? What does it mean in my community in practical terms, not just in the way I've talked with too much rhetoric and grand statements. So let me finish by just saying young people are crucial. Everywhere, young people, we have let young people down in our country. In every way, we have let young people down, and we have to bring young people back into society and into politics, and we have to give young people hope. And the problem with young people is not that young people are stupid. It's not that young people don't have ideas. It's not that young people can't innovate, that they can't imagine, that they can't create. And it's the way Loazi started by saying good people are weak and don't invent and don't lead. There I disagree with you. I know many, many good people who are strong and lead and so on and so on. But I know you were pushing things a little bit. But I'm saying this about young people. Young people inspire me every time I go to see what young people are doing. Young people are capable, but we suffocate young people, including in civil society. Civil society is led by old people a lot of the time, like me. The church is led by old people. You go to the media, you see old people commenting in the media the whole time. The media only asks people to comment if they're over 50 or over 60. We have to change that because we're excluding, most of our population is under 30 in this country, but we've disenfranchised them, and that must change. So I agree with you on that. And the last point that I would just want to affirm is moral regeneration and servant leadership in the church. It is possible, and we have to do a big turn here. It is possible to live a very good life without being rich, without having lots of cars, without having the biggest house, without having a lot of money. It is possible. I've lived my life. I'm middle class, and I have a car and I have a house, but it's not a big house. But it's been rewarding and rich. And we have to show people that actually there is much more joy to be had in living a moral, proper, modest, humble, community-oriented life than in thinking that we must aspire to copy some of these crooks who are in leading business and leading politics and leading government, etc., etc. So a program of moral regeneration, but it has to, moral regeneration, you remember there was once a moral regeneration movement led by a former president. People are clever if they think that you're going to preach moral regeneration and live a different type of life entirely. They don't take it seriously. So moral regeneration, you need to be able to look up and say, this person is living exactly the type of life that he or she is preaching and telling us to live, and turn it into practical respect. So thank you very much. For me, it's been wonderful to be given this opportunity to have this engagement with you today. It's what gives meaning to my own life, and I really wish you strength and power and purpose with your ministry in the Methodist Church. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Brother. Thank you very much.